Hey, what's up guys, it's Marv and welcome back to another Asphalt Legends Unite video. Today we have a review of something that isn't a 5-year-old car. It is the Ford Team FORDZILLA P1. Now, if you didn't watch my 60,000 token video going through the recent Burst of Speed event where I got this car alongside the Lykan Hypersport Neon Edition as well as the Zenvo Aurora Tour, you can take a look at that video to see about how many tokens I spent, which was well above 60K to get those three cars, all of them at maximum stars. So in this video, we'll review the Team FORDZILLA P1. Now, I do want to do a couple of disclaimers. Anyway, couple of things to point out. Firstly, I am not at full max. Not only do I have any import parts to apply to this car, but I actually did start running out of credits because I was upgrading all three cars at the same time. However, I'm not too far off from max, and in some of these races, I do have an overclock applied just to give this car as best of a chance as possible. Alright, so before I get into the nitty-gritty details, I do want to point you guys to the description down below where I have my social media channels linked in addition to my Instagram, which has some cool car photography content if you want to check that out. And I also have my Discord link where you can hang out and chat with a bunch of other people from the community. Alrighty, so let's get down and dirty with the FORDZILLA. And the first thing I want to talk about is the title, which says the FLOPZILLA, because this car flops so hard around the corners because the handling is not good at all. It is one of the most stable cars I've driven recently, but that's kind of a bad thing because at this speed you really want the ability to do those floaty drifts in the corners, and you also want the ability to do nitro punches in the corners so you don't get all four wheels on the ground. And unfortunately, because this car is so planted, you lose so much speed in those sharp corners, and that's the biggest downside of this car. Overall, the rank is really high because the acceleration and top speed are both very good for A class especially, and the nitro is good enough. But because of that handling, it really struggles in multiplayer because you don't know which track you're going to get. And so you want a car that's versatile enough, of course, to handle itself on those top speed tracks, like this car definitely does. But you also want a car that, just in case you get one of those twisty tracks, can handle itself in the corners. And this car just isn't that. And honestly, I was expecting its insane acceleration stat of 85 to really pick itself back up after those corners. But even in double tap nitro, it wasn't really doing that great of a job, at least in terms of feeling. Maybe in terms of raw statistics, it does actually perform like 85 acceleration, but it never really felt that way. And because of that low nitro stat, and because of those low drift speeds, it really means that you don't have so many shockwaves to use after a corner because you have to take such a long time to drift throughout the corner, and you have to use so much nitro to get up to your top speed that you run out of nitro in this car kind of quickly. So if it had better nitro and you could get out of the corners even faster, I could see that it might be able to work, but unfortunately because of that handling stat, it really pulls this car back in those twistier tracks. Now initially, I know I'm painting this car as a bad choice for multiplayer, but realistically, if you keep this car where it's at in Platinum 2, it'll get you from Platinum 2 to Platinum 1, and that's exactly how I used it. As soon as I got access to it, I used no other car but this car to get myself to Platinum 1, and it did a good job at it. Granted, I would lose 10 points every single time I was on a twisty track, but otherwise on tracks like Rome, Himalayas, anything that had good stretches of open runway, I always got first or second place, so it meant that I of course gained way more points than I lost. However, once I got to Platinum 1, it definitely started to depend on which cars I went up against. If I was getting up against those Speedtails and other S-Class cars that you start getting access to in Platinum 1, I was realistically not getting any more first places. Now, I could get second or third if like my competition were Huracans or something like that, depending on my driving skill and track combination, but it just wasn't very consistent, so I had to switch to other cars to get myself to Legend League. So overall, if you want a good car for Platinum 2 specifically, this car will do the job quite well, and I could also see that it might be very useful in slipstream modes. This was during a normal multiplayer season where at least knockdowns were disabled, which definitely helped this car. Otherwise, I would have gotten knocked down so many times by other people in Shockwave when I wasn't, because of course lots of other cars have better nitro efficiency than this car. So it pretty reliably got me from Platinum 2 to Platinum 1, but it did start to fall apart afterward. Again, I'm not sure how it performs in a slipstream environment because I haven't tried it yet, but I can imagine it would hold itself quite well because you would have access to more nitro. However, talking about how my experience was in Platinum 1 really does show you why this car isn't perfect for the current conditions in multiplayer, and that's because of the change in terms of car selection. Previously, before we had the car filters, it was based on class. So because this is one of the highest rank A-class cars, it would do pretty darn well, I imagine, in previous versions where your multiplayer races were based on the class rather than just the general rank and sorting of the car filters. However, this time around, as I mentioned, once you get to Platinum 1, you're no longer facing only A and B class cars, and in fact, you already have access to some S class cars in Platinum 2 and Platinum 3. And again, in those top speed tracks, you may get outclassed by those cars if their drivers are skilled. But that's the main point with this car, is if by itself it were going up against A-class cars, generally it would do very well. However, going up against those S-class cars and also things like the Vandas on those twisty tracks really does make it seem like this car wasn't suited for the current conditions in Asphalt multiplayer. Again, it'll get you reliably from Platinum 2 to Platinum 1, but beyond that, I wouldn't really recommend it. Alright, so as we wind down the video, what is the whole point to all of these different discussions that I'm talking about? Well, generally better on top speed tracks compared to handling tracks. That much is very clear. The other thing is that if you're trying to get from Platinum 2 to Platinum 1, that's great, but if you try to use it in Platinum 1, you're going to struggle a little bit. And I can imagine that in slipstream modes, it might be a lot more effective. So with that being said, is this car worth it? Well, if you bought it during the burst of speed like I did, I was mainly going for the Zenvo Aurora Tour. This car was sort of just a secondary thing to me. Well, yeah, it was pretty worth it because I kind of got it with my Zenvo, and it really just takes a whole bunch of credits to upgrade it, and it was worth it because it is a reliable car to get me from Platinum 2 to Platinum 1. However, if you are looking for that very high-end A-class car to dominate in multiplayer, I do not recommend you spend currency or money on this. I would recommend going with something like the Imola, which is actually available right now, or you can save up for the Valhalla. And if you want something that is really top speed focused, of course you have some other options, including the Jaguar. Alrighty guys, so that was my review of the FORDZILLA P1, a very potent A-class car, but unfortunately it doesn't really have the best place in current Asphalt multiplayer. I could definitely see it being a very good car in other circumstances. Again, if you get it on that top speed track, it will hold its own relatively well, but I just think that there are other better options for high-end A-class cars, but also in terms of vehicle selection for multiplayer in general. But as always, I'm really curious to hear what you guys think of the FORDZILLA in the comment section down below. I can imagine that a lot of you guys also got it during the recent burst of speed, so I'm curious to see how it's panning out for you in multiplayer. But that was it guys, I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you all later.